One day, having built a noose from a government sheet, Ilse Koch will hang herself in a cell of a women's prison where she served a life sentence. In the world, she was known as the Lady with a Lampshade. She is also the Red Witch of Buchenwald. This woman has gone down in history as the most vile creature in Nazi Germany. Many people claimed this honorary title in that bloody era. The prisoners recalled how this lady named Ilse Koch, the wife of the commandant of the Buchenwald concentration camp, loved to ride a horse around the camp and whipped prisoners who got in her way. And they also said that she collected book bindings and gloves made of the skin of the murdered Buchenwald prisoners. The survivors could not forget how one frosty February day they were kept naked on the parade ground for 3 hours while Ilse Koch, along with the guards, was looking for prisoners with a beautiful and unusual tattoo. They were doomed, they were killed and skinned from the dead. Ilse Koch was walking around with a handbag made from the skin of murdered prisoners like cannibals who show off their trophies in the South Seas. And at home she had a table lamp with a large shade, also made of human skin. She especially admired him, and with the pride of a good hostess, pleased the guests with an unusual object, enviously looking at the luxurious interior of the camp commandant's villa. It is generally believed that she was sent to the Buchenwald concentration camp as a warden, and she tortured the prisoners because it was her job. In fact, she was just a housewife, raising children and taking care of her husband. During the years of Buchenwald's existence, from 1937 to 1945, about 250,000 prisoners from 50 countries passed through the camp. 56,000 people were killed. They died of starvation and disease or became victims of medical experiments. After the defeat of the Nazi regime, Ilse Koch, the wife of the commandant of the Buchenwald concentration camp, was put in the dock among other criminals. The lampshade made of prisoner's skin was an obvious proof of her guilt, which was often recalled at the trial. Is it fair to judge Ilse Koch if she was just her husband's wife? Maybe she became a victim of public opinion, eager to punish criminals. Before you continue watching, please subscribe to my channel and like it. Of course, this is optional. The main thing is to be sincere. Ilse Koch, the future witch of Buchenwald, was born in Dresden. She did not get an education, and at the age of 15, she found a job as a secretary at a tobacco factory. In April 1932, she joined the Nazi Party. In those years, the Nazis received more women's votes in the elections than men. Some German women admired the Führer's oratorical gift, while others believed in promises to get out of the economic crisis, and still others simply hated democracy and Democrats, from whom only troubles and misfortunes. Adolf Hitler believed that women had no place in political life. They could join the party, but at the first general meeting in January 1921, Hitler set conditions that no woman would ever join the governing bodies. Among party members in 1932, women made up only 5%. Elsa Keller wished to become one of them, and this determined her fate. A few years later, she met Asa Karl Otto Koch. He was 9 years older than Ilse, fought in the First World War, and was captured by the British, which did not teach him to sympathize with the prisoners. After the war, he found a job as an insurance agent and then sat without work. In 1930, he joined the party, and in 1931, he joined the SS. He managed to serve a criminal sentence. As a knowledgeable person, the SS authorities, after the Nazis came to power, made him the head of the Gestapo prison. When Karl Koch met Ilse, he was already serving as the first commandant of the Sachsenhausen concentration camp, which was considered a model. This meant that not a single prisoner dared to complain about anything. In May 1937, Karl Koch and Ilse Keller got married. Those wishing to start a family were required to provide a certificate of fitness for marriage signed by a doctor. Karl Koch also needed the approval of his superiors. On December 31, 1931, Heinrich Himmler signed an order on the procedure for the marriage of S members. Those wishing to marry applied for permission, and the bride was secretly checked by the race department. The woman had to provide evidence of racial purity for 5 generations. Marriage with a woman in whose veins an admixture of Jewish, Slavic, Mongolian, African, or Gypsy blood was found was prohibited. Ilse Koch passed the test successfully. In July 1937, Karl Koch was instructed to build and lead the new Buchenwald concentration camp. In September, the man was encouraged by conferring the special rank of SS Standartenführer, equated to the army rank of colonel. Ilse Koch followed her husband to her new place of service. In those days, women in exchange for marriage, which was necessary for life in society, offered her husband loyalty and obedience. The wife was perceived primarily as a housewife providing for the life of a man and as a mother capable of giving birth to children. After moving to Buchenwald, Ilse gave birth every year. She fulfilled her duty as a loyal member of the party. The Nazis treated women in a consumerist way, expressed dissatisfaction. German women give birth less than the state needs. The Nazis urged German women to devote themselves entirely to the birth of children. Adolf Hitler spoke with inspiration about the submissive selflessness with which a German woman fulfills the mission of procreation entrusted to her by nature. During Karl Koch's time in Buchenwald, Ilse gave birth to 3 children. She was just a housewife, but the concentration camp prisoners were more afraid of her than of her husband. At the same time, Karl Koch was considered the most cruel among the commandants of concentration camps. Active by nature, Ilse Koch took part in her husband's affairs. She had the keys to his office. She looked through all the papers that he received and sent. Karl Koch was flattered by her willingness to help him make a career. Karl Koch, the owner of Buchenwald, was patronized by the concentration camp inspector Theodor Eicke, a rare bandit even among the Nazis. For a crime against party comrades, Theodor Eicke was declared mentally ill and expelled from the SS, but then returned. Heinrich Himmler greatly appreciated a pathological sadist. Theodor Eicke was instructed to shoot the chief of staff of the assault troops, Ernst Röhm, when he began to interfere with Hitler. This crime helped Theodor Eicke a lot. He received a high rank in Nazi Germany and led all concentration camps. He was also subordinate to the SS division Death's Head, which guarded the camps. In Buchenwald, the 3rd Regiment of the Thuringia Division was organized under the command of Karl Koch. In just 2 weeks, 38 prisoners were killed by guards in an apparent attempt to escape. Among them was former Austrian Justice Minister Robert Winterstein. The 4 SS men who shot them were 16 years old, 6 were 17, and the rest were 18 and 19 years old. In fact, there was nowhere to run. The German population did not help the fugitives, but there were those who did not submit and could keep their morale in spite of the circumstances. So they were killed. This was done exclusively by volunteers, those who liked to shoot defenseless prisoners. The children of Karl and Ilse Koch grew up in a camp among SS men from the Deadhead Division. On Sunday, we walked with them in the zoo created for SS guards. Professional killers told Ilse and her children about their exploits, called themselves political soldiers. When one of the recalcitrants, Pastor Paul Schneider, who did not want to greet the Nazi flag, was killed in the camp, Karl Koch mournfully told his family, "He was my favorite prisoner," but his heart failed. Unlike other concentration camps, in Buchenwald, the crematorium was placed in the most prominent place. When smoke was coming out of the chimney, everyone understood what was going on, and each of them knew what was waiting for him here. Looking at the prisoners, who until recently were significant figures in Germany, Karl and Ilse Koch were imbued with an awareness of their own importance. The lives of these people were in their hands. The furnaces of the crematorium were working at full load because during the period of mass actions, up to 400 people could be shot overnight. In Buchenwald, Wehrmacht soldiers accused of desertion and participants in the unsuccessful attempt on Hitler on July 20, 1944, were also imprisoned. Colonel Klaus Schenk von Stauffenberg, who tried to kill the Führer, was shot on the same day, but Heinrich Himmler ordered the bodies of Stauffenberg and his associates to be dug out of the grave, burned, and scattered. At the same time, the families of the conspirators were also sent to Buchenwald. In this concentration camp, the Nazis also kept their political opponents, communists, social democrats, and clerics. One by one they were destroyed. It was in Buchenwald that the leader of the Communist Party of Germany, Ernst Thälmann, was killed. Soon the career of the first commandant of Buchenwald, Karl Koch, came to an end. The main administrative and economic department was dissatisfied with the low economic indicators of the concentration camp. Karl Koch was fired and sent to a new place of work in the newly opened Majdanek concentration camp in Poland, with instructions to help organize a new concentration camp for the extermination of prisoners of war. Ilse Koch stayed in Buchenwald. She began to live in the same house with the new commandant Hermann Forstedt. It is believed that Ilse, separated by the will of her superiors from her husband, did not grieve much, because the new housemate comforted her as best he could. Karl Koch's business trip to Majdanek was the end of his career, because the concentration camp inspector Theodor Eicke, who patronized him, left for the front. Karl and Ilse Koch were brought together not only by party membership, but also by a craving for a beautiful life. Ilse loved to dress fashionably, which required a lot of money during the war years. They bought a villa, spent a lot of money to make repairs in it. Karl and Ilse believed that they had earned the right to enjoy themselves continuously next to the death factory. They arranged for themselves a beautiful country life, breakfasts in nature, dinners with guests. This gave rise to envy among colleagues and a desire to take such a bread place. In August 1943, Karl Koch was arrested by the Gestapo, and his wife was imprisoned after him. The judge charged Karl Koch with the unauthorized torture of prisoners by the authorities and the murder of 2 prisoners employed in the camp administration. The reason was not that Berlin showed unprecedented humanism. The SS authorities suspected that in this way Karl Koch got rid of unwanted witnesses or accomplices of his financial frauds. Ilse Koch was accused of embezzling a large amount of public funds. Ilse was kept in prison, but eventually released. In the last months of the war, the authorities of the Third Reich became indifferent to her. However, no one forgave her husband. After an investigation, the judge found him guilty. Karl Koch stole millions from the SS treasury. The first commandant of Buchenwald was shot in early April 1945, and on the evening of April 11, 1945, 2 American tanks approached Buchenwald. An hour later, a firefight with camp guards began. Soon the resistance was suppressed. April 11 is celebrated as the International Day of Liberation of Prisoners of Nazi concentration camps. The Americans released 21,000 prisoners. Among them, there were 900 children and teenagers. The prisoners began to receive first aid. The Americans deployed a field hospital, but more than 100 people still died these days. For them, help came too late. Buchenwald was the first concentration camp where the Germans did not have time to destroy the traces of crimes. On April 16, the American authorities forced residents of a neighboring city to visit a concentration camp and see what was going on there. Photographs of prisoners, a lot of corpses, as well as interior items made from prisoners' skin were distributed all over the world. The war was not over yet, and on April 24, 1945, American intelligence officers compiled the first report on what they saw in the concentration camp. The Americans immediately began investigating the crimes committed in the camp. For a year and a half, they interrogated almost 6,000 suspects and collected hundreds of testimonies from former prisoners. On April 11, 1947, the Buchenwald trial began. The American military tribunal sat in Dachau, the first Nazi concentration camp near Munich. 30 SS men, former owners of Buchenwald, were tried. There was only one woman among them, Ilse Koch. Dr. Waldemar Hoven killed people to please her with a beautiful and original tattoo. All this made a strong impression on American judges. Ilse Koch was found guilty of complicity in crimes that were committed in a concentration camp. She was sentenced to life imprisonment. All sentences were subject to approval by General Lucius Clay, the head of the American military administration in Germany. On June 8, 1948, the general signed 15 death sentences and replaced 7 with life imprisonment, commuted the rest of the sentences, and the former officials of the camp administration were released. Ilse Koch served only 2 years, as the general reduced her sentence to 4 years. However, the lady with a lampshade made of human skin was known all over the world, and the world was outraged. In 1949, Ilse Koch was brought to trial again for complicity in 135 murders. The wonderful town of Weimar is located just a few kilometers from Buchenwald, but people here did not know anything or wanted to know nothing. The mass destruction of people became possible not only because there were sadists like Ilse Koch, but also because many other people remained completely indifferent. The only force against concentration camps could be internal autonomy, the force necessary for non-participation. It is necessary to resist the domination of any collective. People who blindly integrate into the collective destroy their ability to self-determination. On January 15, 1951, Ilse Koch was resentenced to life imprisonment. The day before, she had a hysterical